That's very disturbing because I mean, I was hoping that that we'd be hearing about an air bridge with Israel and I was worried that Britain would not be up to the standard, but it could be either.
Yeah, it's not a simple situation at all. Not a simple situation at all.
Yeah.
I certainly always like to be sort of positive and upbeat and encouraging, etc. We just have to do the very best we can, and it's exciting about the possibilities of some opening of Shul next week. Please God, announcements still to come, full details. But there's an awful lot of issues. I'm doing at least 2 chuppahs next week, and remember that it's the 3 weeks on Thursday, so there's going to be a tremendous rush and pressure on chuppahs in the first part of next week. But you think about all the normal contact and interaction that a chuppah involves, and think about that in terms of social distancing. It's an interesting exercise. Anyway, we are at 9:30, and therefore I'm going to start off. I hope that some, if not all, most of you have got the source sheets to hand, which I must apologize, Kenny was only able to send out late last night, because this shir, as you're going to see, is really 3 or 4 shiurim in one, and it's always easy to know. It's every shir I find I put together for Shema is a bit of an adventure in and of itself. And I start off thinking we're going to go in one particular direction, and then find that we're taken in others. So I'm going to give you an outline of the outline, because this shir has 17 points to it, and 7. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So it has 17 different points in it. And whilst the title is The Big Return, Priorities and Considerations as we plan our return to Shul and Tefillah B'Tzibur, I'm going to deal with this more conceptually than in the small detail for a number of reasons. One of which is that the conceptual side of it is in many ways, to me, certainly something which the bigger picture informs the way we need to be looking at things. And second, leads to some very interesting areas. And thirdly, to be honest, many of the finer details are things that we're still working on. And the reason why we may open a day or 2 later than would otherwise be the case, the earliest possible day for opening, is just simply to make sure that we can get as much of our act together in the very best possible way. So the first part of the shir, which is just the first 3 sources really, is going to look at the importance of order, seder, organization in life, familiarity, routine. Not routine which we look at in a negative sense as something which is perhaps a little bit boring, or something which is gets us into a rut, but the importance of routine, as we found during the course of the past 3.5 months, the way in which we order our lives, try to get up a similar sort of time each day, as far as davening, even if we can't have tefillah b'tzibur, but to daven as we've been doing with our Zoom gatherings and other opportunities, to try and keep a pattern, a shape to life. Then why it was that we so rapidly closed down our shuls, and it wasn't just us in any one country, across the world, unprecedented. And a very interesting halachic principle of chamiros sakanta me'isura, that where there is an element of danger to life, we view that more stringently than the questions of isur v'heter, that which may be permitted or forbidden as far as pure halacha is concerned. And this is a very interesting sugya that we're going to look into during the course of the shir, chamiros sakanta me'isura, why we view danger, possible danger to life, as something which is even more significant, may override certain elements or be viewed with a greater stringency than simple shilas of that which is permitted or that which is forbidden. Then I want to look very much in sources 10 through till 13 to the concept of what Shul really means to us and the sanctity of Shul, and that which in the new normal, as will be certainly in the early weeks and months of our return to Shul, that which we need to look for almost to compensate for the fact that there will be facets of the social interaction, facets of the normal way in which we pray that won't be available to us, and how we can compensate from that by an appreciation of what Shul is about. And finally, sources 13 to 17, a fascinating concept about lifetime versus limited holiness. This manifests itself in a fascinating Talmudic and halachic discussion about the status of the Kohen when compared to the status of the Nazir, and that will come up to a later stage in the Shir. But to start initially with this concept of Seder, how important to us as human beings, and particularly as Shomrei Torah Mitzvahs, people who observe Torah Mitzvahs, how important Seder is to us. So in source number 1, a Gemara in Sota Mem Tes, and this is particularly poignant as we're now in the month of Tammuz, and we're coming towards the time of the 3 weeks. Next Thursday week will be Shiva Asar Tammuz. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, "Hey, Rabbi Yeshua." Rabbi Yeshua bore witness, gave testimony. Miyom shechorav beis hamikdash ein yom she'ein bei klala. From that day when the temple was destroyed, there has not been a day without an element of curse. There is an element of curse. We're missing something from our regular lives without the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara goes on to say, further to that Mishnah, Amar Rava says, an even more dispiriting, bit of an unedifying start to our Shia. There is a source sheet available, Harvey. Kenny sent it out last night by email. Kenny, Harvey, just about source sheet. I'm not sure how to share it on the screen. If Rabbi Portnoy is listening at this point and can put it up for people to follow, I'm sure that will be appreciated by those who may not have the source sheets to hand. Okay, so the next source, or the continuing source number 1, Amar Rava says, Rava b'chol yom v'yom meruba kilosa mishal chaverei. Rava said, not only, as the Mishnah taught, that since the destruction of the temple, there's been an element of curse to each every day, there is also something that goes beyond that, and that is that Rava said each day's curse is somehow greater than that of the preceding one. This is a great way to start a Shia. Maybe we should give out the antidepressants at this particular point. However, the Gemara in its usual practical way goes on to say, Elo alma amai ka makayim. So how does the world exist? How can we exist in a world, and we've known this, I think, over the past 3.5 months, where we feel it's just going from bad to worse, and we think it's improving, and then we suddenly find, oh, there's a bit of a spike, or more than a bit of a spike, and whether it's Leicester, whether it's Israel, wherever it may be, we're challenged, and we don't know what's going to happen as we start to unlock on what the concept is going to be. So he answered very interestingly. He said, Alma says the Gemara, so how's the world carry on? Akadusha de Sidra v'ayeshmi rabba da'agaduta. He says there are two things. One is, ironically, almost right at the very end of davening, Uvol Tzion Goel, that particular tefillah, which is often said as people are rushing out of Shul at the end of Shachris, may the Redeemer come to Zion, and the Kedusha, which is included, which has actually a previous Tosh Mashir, where we looked at different elements of Kedusha in the course of our davening. The Uvol Tzion Goel and the Amen Yehi Shmi Rabbah, the response to Kaddish, which we say after Agadat, after homiletic exposition, these two elements, not going into the whys, but these two elements of regular commitment, Amen Yeshmar and Kedusha to Sidra, allow us a release from the threatening darkness, the darkness of post-Churban Beis Hamikdash, post-destruction of the temple darkness. Shenema, based on a verse in Eov in Job, Eretz Eifosu K'may Eifel, Salmoves Veloisadorim. The land is shrouded as if in the dark shadow of death, and there is no order. Says the Gemara, that if you learn from this, element of this verse, Hoyesh Sedorim, if there is order, if there is some sort of structure to one's life, Tofia me oifel, that relieves one from darkness. And the genius of the sages was that post, or the time when they realized that we were going to be exiled from Israel and lose the temple, they established the concept that the words of our lips will compensate for the absence of the korbanos. They established a template and a framework whereby Jewish life, religiously as well as physically, politically, temporally, emotionally, could yet flourish and develop and prosper, even without, hopefully only temporarily, temporary has been nearly 2,000 years so far, but without the presence of the temple. Now, source number 2 gives us something of an insight into how Shul itself offers us structure and order, shape and form in our lives. Omar Ravin bar Rav Adam Rav Yitzchok, says Rav Avin bar Rav Adam named Rav Yitzchok, anybody who is accustomed regularly to come to Shul, and one day that person doesn't come, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashil bay, the Holy One, blessed be He, inquires after that person's welfare. Shema, as it says, a verse in Isaiah, Mi vochem yirei Hashem, who is there amongst you who reveres the Lord? Shemea Bakel Avdo, who listens to the voice of his servant. Asher Holach Chashechim, who went into darkness, Ve'in Noigaleh, and there was no light for him. Says Rav Avin bar Rav Adam named Rav Yitzchok, explaining this verse, that the latter part of the verse, Im halach lidvar mitzvah, if he went to engage in something which was necessary and he missed his slot in shul, as it were, because there was another compelling mitzvah which overtook him, then noigalei, then he'll have light, then it's okay, it's acceptable. Imidvar shusolach, if however he went for a matter which was just because it was something that wasn't absolutely necessary, but it was something that he went to because he decided he wanted to do it was of his own volition, if that's what the type of matter he went to, then he won't have that light. In other words, there's a beautiful principle in Judaism of what's known as Onis Rachmana Patre. Compelling circumstance, force majeure, is something for which I'm not held responsible. And therefore, if something takes over and prevents me from being able to discharge a particular responsibility where a specific mitzvah is concerned, I'm forgiven. But you jolly well better have a good reason. And therefore, if you just go of your own volition because, you just fancy a day out, as it were, and because of that, you cast off your responsibilities between yourself and the Almighty, possibly yourself and your fellow being as well, then you should know that you'll find that there's an element of light missing from your life. As that verse in Isaiah concludes, Yivtach b'shem Hashem. In maintaining our regular program, the structure of our lives, the order, it's very difficult sometimes. I have a daily commitment with a chavrusa, and I'm sure my chavrusa himself, as well as I myself at times think, I could just do with being able to have this hour for myself. But having a chavrusa means I'm not just letting myself down, I'm letting him down as well. There's a sense of responsibility. And Yivtach b'shem Hashem, where am I get the time from? You've got to trust in Hashem. Part of the commitment between ourselves and the Almighty is that we set aside parts of our day for religious and spiritual elevation, ennoblement, enhancement, advancing our lives, developing our inner spiritual core, our connection with the divine. And even though we may think that's depriving us of time, just like the person who works 6 days but religiously rests on Shabbos actually has a better overall life financially, materially, physically, as well as spiritually, emotionally, and religiously, just as that seventh day, taking the seventh out of the week, does not harm, but actually adds to one's total experience of life. Likewise, having that Seder on a daily basis. My Rebbe Reb Volber, who I quote in source number 3 from the first volume of his beautiful work, Ali Shur, puts this second Gemara of source number 2 on page 2 in a beautiful context. He says, someone who regularly and diligently, we might say religiously, attends Shul, merits a special measure of divine attention or protection. So much so that if one misses a day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mashil by the Holy One, blessed be He, asks, what's going on with my friend? Where is he? And he says, Shmira Saseda Kavua Ba'aveda, when one is actually diligent about maintaining one's regular program in religious matters, Noigalai, that gives one an extra element of light and quality and beauty to one's life. Upritzas Hageder, and breaching that framework, leloita maspik, without sufficient reason. There are reasons sometimes where a pressing matter in this physical world may take priority, and I'm not able to daven with a minyan, I'm not able to come to shul. But you'd better weigh it up carefully and make sure it's a tam maspik, because without a sufficient reason, ein noigalei, you won't have that blessing of light. Because one should have trusted in Hashem and not to be mevatel the hanhoga hakavua, not to set aside, to cancel one's fixed commitment. So fixed commitments in religious life, including regular attendance to shul, are very important, are essential. And one of the things that modern day sociologists have come across is a phenomenon that the happiness factor, as they call it, seems to be stronger amongst committed religious people than amongst those who have no sense of commitment to religion, for us, of course, to Torah and mitzvahs. And in the latter part of source 3, Revolver goes on to explain, Miyasoid HaSeder, I just put this in because I think it's so relevant to us with what we've been going through as individual people over these past 3.5 months. One of the things which is a key principle or fundamental of Seder is a person knows how to self-manage through inevitably changing moods. Reb Volb himself used to have a beautiful phrase. He used to say in a mixture of Yiddish, English, and Hebrew, a mensch is nicht kein computer. A human being is not a computer. We're not machines. We need downtime. We need to manage ourselves well. And we need to recognize that there are times when we can charge ahead and we can manage to stay up till 2, 3 in the morning and be productive and do stuff and still carry on the next day. And there are other times where we need an early night and we need to unwind and we need to relax. And we've got to manage that very carefully. That when a person perhaps feels down, a person shouldn't allow himself or herself to be swept away by a sense of despondency. And as a result of that, you won't keep up with your regular commitments. Or sometimes it can be sometimes one can be overwhelmed by a specific trait, which will distract one from one's usual approach to divine service. I'm working, for example, at the moment, maybe working on trying to conquer my attribute of, I don't know, let's say anger. And I don't want to get angry. And something happens which causes me to get angry, and that will then set me back a number of days, if not more, in the efforts I've been making not to get angry. So a person needs to know how to order, self-organize, self-manage the changing moods and rhythms of life out there, as well as life within here. And those 3 first sources are incredibly important in defining for us what shul and tefillah b'tzibur, shared prayer, shared experience, and shared common life brings to us. Which then brings us onto the critical question of how could we just at one fell swoop. Why? Why did we see fit to abandon all of that? Well, the chief rabbi said, the government said, etc., etc. But how do we relate to that? How do we understand that? And how can we put that into context to rationalize to ourselves all the things that we've had to do over the past weeks and months? B'diavad, not we wanted to do it. It's been something we've done reluctantly, but how do we understand this concept of the sakana, of the very real danger that we've been facing up to? And perhaps we've even, to some extent, forgotten those awful days when all one heard out in the world out there were the sirens backwards and forwards taking people to hospital, and the awful days when the early days when clearly things were not well enough prepared, where wonderful practitioners, medical practitioners from the very highest levels of consultants all the way through the medical chain were falling sick to the pandemic, and unfortunately, Rahman al-Islam, a number of leading medical practitioners succumbed, as did a number of leading rabbonim, as did so many hundreds, thousands, and Rahman al-Islam, now tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the world. So the next few sources, we're going to explore this concept of sakana, this concept of danger to life, of why protection is both imperative and better than cure, how avoidance of danger to life is the priority. It's almost like a supra mitzvah. So we're going to start off, and I suppose all of you would quote to me the verse from Vayeschan of Nishmartem ha'od l'nafshosechem. You've got to very carefully protect your lives. But actually we'll see both from the Rambam, from Maimonides, and the source he quotes from the Torah, that there is another verse which particularly impresses upon us the importance of preservation of life. Source number 4. Echot hagag, whether we're talking about a roof, an open flat roof from which a person could, God forbid, fall to their death, v'chol davar sheyesh bo sakana, or anything which presents an immediate danger to life, v'roi shehi koshel ba'adam, it's possible that a person could stumble, v'yomus, and die as a result. K'goyin shoyas alei be'er or boer b'chatzera, one has a well or pit in one's yard, bein sheyesh b'mayim, bein shein b'mayim, whether it's got water in it or not. Water in it, there'd be a danger of drowning, but a pit, a well, there could be a danger of breaking one's neck, God forbid, and falling into the pit, etc., etc. Chayav, one's obligated. The same is obligated to other mitzvahs. One's obligated to make a barrier 10 tefachim high, or to make a covering for that pit or well, so the person shouldn't fall into and die. And similarly, says the Rambam, any area where it's possible to stumble that could lead to a danger to life. So avoiding contagion, where that is highly contagious disease, is something which presents an imminent threat to life, is included in this. You've got to shield, you've got to protect, you've got to avoid the danger. Says the Rambam, mitzvah sasei lahasiroi, it is a positive commandment there's a positive commandment to mitigate against that danger. Lishomeh mimenu, look how the Rambam says it 3 times. Lahasiroi, lishomeh mimenu, v'lizoeh b'dova yofe yofe. How the Rambam stresses the importance of avoiding a life-threatening danger. Be exceedingly cautious about the matter. As the verse says, protect yourself and protect your life very much. So we have danger to life set against danger to maintenance of all that's important to me in life. We explained how important Seder and regular structure, format is to our lives, and yet at the same time, a danger to life, you've got to take whatever measures are possible. Hishomer lecha ushmer nafshecha ma'od. Look how the Torah puts it. Protect yourself, guard your life, ma'od, very much. Source numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8 are going to lead us into a very interesting area. This is the area which you would least have expected to find in this shir, the one that I might have perhaps least expected to develop, but it's absolutely fascinating, and it's to do with, as you can see at the end of source 5, Chamira Sakanta Meisura. Something which is dangerous is considered, is dealt with in halacha, even more stringently than something which is forbidden. The original source for this is a Gemara in Chulin Daf Tesser on base to Yudam Adalef. Omar Ravashi said, Ravashi Tor Shema. There we are, our very own title that we've used for this series, which is now going for 3.5 years. Now's not the time to deal with this at length, but Kenny has indicated that come the end of this year, 2020, he is looking for someone else to take over the leadership of this program, and I very much hope that will be possible, that we can go from strength to strength. I've noticed during the pandemic, when we've been able to do this online, last year we had over 20 people. Again this morning, over 20 people logging in and joining this year. We must ensure, please God, that Torah Shema goes from strength to strength. And anyone who feels that they have an interest in running the program, as Kenya has done for the past 3.5 years so incredibly well, launching something from nothing and making it into something very significant in our lives, please speak to Kenny directly about this. So, Torah Shema, Tzluchis, Shenicha Megula, a container that was left uncovered overnight. Uba u'metzah mechusa. And you come and find this container, and we're talking here about a container of water, this is the context, which was used for ritual cleansing in the days of the temple. And the water had to be maintained to a level of pristine purity. So if you have a container with this water that would be used, actually, the Gemara is talking there in the context of the sprinkling of water together with the ashes of the parah adumah, you find that the container was accidentally left uncovered, and you come find it covered, you consider it to be tameo, to be ritually impure. Shani omer odom tomei nichnus l'shom v'kisa. Because how can it be that the container's covered? The containers don't just cover themselves. I remember as a little boy, it was a well-known story in the family that clumsily I had knocked over, we had a cat at home, I'd knocked over the cat's dish with milk, and I was accused by my parents of spilling the milk. And of course, as a little child, not wanting particularly to take responsibility and nervous to what the consequence would be, I said, oh, the cat came in and tripped over the bowl and knocked over the milk. Have you ever seen a cat knock over and trip over a container of milk? It doesn't happen that way, right? Same thing here. Dishes do not cover themselves. So you come and find that the container is covered, tameo. I have to consider the water as having been ritually defiled. I can't go on and use that water as pure water for the sprinkling of the ashes. Because I assume Odom Tomei Nichnos L'Shom V'Kisa. Whole question why I assume it was a ritually impure person, but if I don't have evidence, I have to assume that it's been covered by a ritually impure person. If you left it covered, and you come and found it uncovered, it becomes unfit for use. It's not actually tamea, but it's unfit for a different reason. It's interesting, different animals drink in different ways. A chulda, which is some type of rodent, some translated as a weasel or a stoat, this type of animal, when it drinks, it contaminates the water by some of its saliva dribbling into the water, and therefore it's psula. Likewise, a nacha shekundra and Gamliel's opinion that there's a risk that it will have put some of its venom into the water, or even if it was possible because it was uncovered that dew may have fallen into this water, it becomes unfit for use, but not tamei, not tamea. Yeshua ben Levi, why do we make a distinction between the container which was covered and then was found, which was uncovered and found to be covered, and the one which was covered and then found to be uncovered? I can rely on the second case and say that it wasn't a person who uncovered it, because rodents and other types of animals can uncover. Look at our bins and how the magpies come and pick stuff out of the bins. Rodents, animals, birds can take things out. They don't put covers neatly back on. So it must have been a human being in the first instance put the cover back on, rends it tomei, in the second case rends it posel. However, ilu sofik mayim megulim asurim. If you've got a doubt about mayim megulim, water which is found to be uncovered, which is considered to be a sakana. There are certain things you leave them uncovered overnight. You shouldn't drink or eat from them. So, for example, part of sakana is mentioned water that's left uncovered overnight. It's a question whether it's other liquids as well. Shelled eggs, onions, peeled onions, which are left uncovered overnight. All of these things are mentioned as sakana. Says the Gemara, Shema mino, we learn from Mechamira Sakanta Meisura. When you're dealing with this concept of sakana, and we'll define this more in a moment, but the pandemic clearly is a sakana, you've got to relate to it even more seriously than you would relate to a question of Issa v'Heta. So in the first case, for example, we said when you found the container had been uncovered, you didn't have to assume anymore the worst case scenario. But in the case of a potential sakana of water that's left uncovered overnight, you have to assume the worst case scenario, because if something has happened to contaminate it, it will be a sakana, it's a danger, and we don't use uncovered water under any circumstances, even though in the first part of that brisa, we saw it possible to rationalize and reconcile in different ways what the backstory may have been as to what happened with that container which was found covered after being uncovered or uncovered after being covered. Now, we come to an even more fascinating application of sakana to do with, and you're all familiar with this, that we do not have meat and fish together. It's not clear the reason why, but this is one of the fairly rare examples in halacha of what's known as sakana. Having these two things together is considered to represent an element of danger. Now, Amar Rav, source number 6, Basa shchuta shami. If you have meat which has been shechted, it's kosher meat, and it's fatty meat. Shetzaloi im basan avela kochush. You roasted it together. Roasted together in the oven with meat that was treif. So you think straight away, my goodness, is there any havamina that this would be permitted? Says Rav Osor. Rav says you can't eat that meat. Even the kosher meat you can't eat. My timer, what's the reason? Miftame mehadodi. They, as it were, the fat will spatter, even though it was the kosher meat that was fat, there was the fattier meat. We'll say the fat will spatter onto the non-kosher meat, backwards, forwards. There'll be a transfer of a certain element. Today we're all understanding contagion and how the tiniest aerosol particles can create huge damage. Halachically, with this meat, there's a problem. Levi Omar, Levi says something remarkable. You've got to remember these two names, Rav and Levi. So Rav says it's forbidden. Levi says, afilu bosa shchuta kochush. Even if you have a lean piece of kosher meat, shetzelo in bosa nevela shamin, that was roasted together, not actually touching one another, but adjacent to one another in the oven, with meat that was fatty meat that was unkosher, mutter. It's permitted to eat the kosher meat. That's remarkable. No one would do that nowadays. Before you even phone me to ask the shai, you'd have thrown both pieces of meat away. My timer, what's the reason? So Levi says a very interesting thing. Reicha ba'almahu, he says, we're not worried about the very small potential transfer of particles from the fat that jumps forwards and backwards from the treif meat to the kosher meat to the kosher meat to the treif meat. We're not worried about that. The only issue here is transfer of aroma. Obviously, they're being cooked together in the same oven. And he says, Reichalav milsahi. There's a very interesting halachic dispute in the difference of opinion in matters of kashrus, whether aroma is problematic or not. I'll tell you one very interesting shaila that I had a year or two ago. Someone phoned me that they bought a packet of kosher smoked salmon, not realizing that it was kosher, but not kosher la Pesach. And this was on Pesach. They bought it in the supermarket. So the licensing authority was from Manchester, and I'm very friendly with the director of Kashrus. We learned together in Koil many years ago. I phoned him up and he says a fascinating shaila. Is because that particular smoked salmon is smoked on chippings of wood from barrels in which whiskey was produced. So because of that, the whiskey, of course, is chametz. And the question is reicha milsa or lav milsa? The transfer of aroma, the reason they smoke it over these particular chippings of wood is because they believe it imparts an element of flavor, but is it the flavor or the reicha or the smell? In the end, certainly with Pesach, one had to be machmir. But according to Levi, there are grounds for saying reicha lav milsahi. And listen to the next thing, source, the third line of source 6, you won't believe this. Ovid Levi uvda bereish galusa begdi v'dova acher. Levi, who was in the house of the exilarch, so it's like you're in the chief rabbi's house, and the shaila came up of a goat, a kosher goat, that had been roasted in an oven together with dova ache, is a chazir, is a pig. You can't get more treif than a pig, can you? And Levi permitted it. Rashi points out Levi only permitted it b'di eved. You can't do this lechatchila. In the first instance, you can't do this. You may remember a few years ago, there was a whole outcry because there was a photo that went viral of a kosher meat delivery where there were sides of meat from kosher shchita and treifa animals on the racks in the same van. And there was a whole question, and there's no question, l'chachili, you can't do that. But the Eved doesn't necessarily treif. But it certainly was not good publicity for that particular kashrus authority. Ovid Levi Uvda, Shenitzlu Betano, says Rashi, they were cooked together in the oven, and the question was raised with him and he permitted it. So it's rather interesting, Levi's opinion, which is radical and would tell you that as far as kashrus is concerned, you could rely on something which has been cooked together with something kosher, being cooked, something which is non-kosher in the same oven. Now, the Gemara continues on, and this is why I brought this whole Gemara down as a scene in a moment. Hahi binso, source number 7 on page 3. There was a fish which was once roasted, itve bahadi bisra, fish in an oven roasted together with meat. Osra rova mi parzikaya lemechle bekuscha. Rova mi parzikaya didn't allow this fish to be eaten together with kutach. Kutach, some of you may remember from the Gemara in Psochim, is some sort of condiment, some sort of spread, flavoring, a bit like sort of a mustard or tomato ketchup we might use nowadays. But as Rashi says, yesh beicholov, it had milk in it, mishum de kosova reicha milsahi. He was concerned about the possibility of there being milk in the kutach and this fish having a meat flavor to it, and therefore you shouldn't eat the two together. He says, Rav Ashi says, no, wait a minute. Fish together with meat, you can't have that. And if it was cooked together in the oven, even just to have the fish together with salt is prohibited, mishum dekashil reicha, either because apparently it can cause bad breath, or another problem. What's the other problem? Says Rashi Tzoras. Leprosy. It can cause contagion. It's a danger to life. And therefore we find, and this is the interesting question, as to what Levi would say under these circumstances. Levi, if you remember, permitted b'diavad. You can't go and do this in the first instance, to cook treif meat with kosher meat in the same oven. Certainly can't do that. But if it happened, Levi was wont to say, Rav disagreed with him. Rav said you can't do it, even b'diavad. But Levi said you can eat the meat afterwards. What would he say if it was meat and fish? That's the interesting question. So Mar Baraji said, don't have fish which has been cooked together with meat, even if they're both kosher, they've been cooked in the same oven. Don't have it even by itself. Don't consider it to be fleishik fish. You can't have it because it's dangerous. And this is something which we see in source number 8. And this shows again the risk of danger, the premium which Chazal put on sakona, that you can't have meat and fish together because it leads to some form of contagion. And the Ramah, which I'm not going to go through in full detail at the moment, says that you shouldn't roast. Well, the Ramah will do now, Hagos, line 2 of source 8. The Ramah, apparently pasking like Levi says, but the Eved, it doesn't matter if you cooked fish and meat together, it doesn't mean in the same pot. You can't eat them from the same pot. But if you roasted fish or you spit roasted fish and meat together, and as long as they weren't touching, you can eat them b'di'evet. The Shach says, quoting the Sefer Be'er-Sheva, the latter part of Source 8, you can't do that. He says, even b'diavad, even if it happened, even after the events, you cannot have salted fish which has been roasted together with meat, even if they were separated out, even with social distancing, if we may say so. Even if they were 2 meters apart, doesn't help if they're in the same oven. Even those places where they would allow this for kashrus, in other words, Levi, who would allow you to eat fish which has been roasted, meat which has been roasted with non-kosher meat, he'd allow you to eat that meat b'diavad. He says, but le'inyan sakanta osa afilu di'evet, underline that and put it in bold, the end of source 8. As far as sakana is concerned, we're more stringent than the issa v'heta. We're more stringent. So according to Levi, isn't this an incredible thing? According to Levi, you roasted in your oven a piece of kosher mahadrin beef together with glat treif chaza in the same oven, separate from each other. Levi would say you can eat it. But fish together with meat, the Be'er-Sheva, as quoted by the Shach, posits, you couldn't eat it because of sakana. And this tells me again and informs me why we've been so machmir about being out of shul these past weeks and months. Rahman al-Islam, there's danger in the air. We've got to be extremely careful. Source number 9 tells us one other example of the way in which there is a thought of sakana, of danger, being over an overriding consideration halacha. The Sei Chemed in Klolim Mareches Mem Klal Kuf Ein Gimel quotes the following question that was raised and discussed by the Chidah and the Birkei Yosef in Even Ha'ezer. And that is, we say in general, something which is an unlikely or unusual occurrence. The rabbis didn't extend their decree in such a situation. So something which you're very unlikely to come across. They may have said something is forbidden in most circumstances, but if it was an unlikely occurrence, they didn't extend their decree that far. The question is, when it's a chashash sakona, when it's an element of danger, did they perhaps extend their decree because of the chayme, because of the stringency of danger? In the end, the shliach concludes that the principle of Rabbanan legozru, the mills shlicha, the rabbi is not making a decree in an unlikely circumstance, is so powerful that it applies even in sakona. But you can see in source 9, there was a havamina, there was a hypothesis to say that chamira sakanta meisura, that a sakona, an element of danger, is so severe that it overrides the consideration, even in the case of something which is an unlikely circumstance or situation. Going on to page 4 now, we move away from the sakana to the return to shul. In source number 10, I'm quoting the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to read it through in the English because it's just such a beautiful piece which tells us about the significance of shul. The sanctity of a shul in the house of study is very great. We are cautioned to be in awe of the one who dwells within the may his name be blessed, as it is written, Vayikra 1930, and you shall revere my holy places. And shuls and studies are also called mikdash. They're considered to be a mikdash shmat, a small reflection of the glory of the temple itself, as it's written in Ezekiel 11:16. I shall be to them as a small sanctuary. And the Gemara in Megillah Chavtes tells us, what is a small sanctuary? Boti knesios, boti midrashos, our houses of prayer and our houses of study. V'lachein, therefore, osla dabem dvorim betelim. One shouldn't engage in idle chatter within them. It's a bit difficult at 2 meters a pace to have conversations, perhaps, although one person who'd been to a shul in Israel told me that it's even worse, the decorum, because people have to shout across 2 meters in order to have a conversation with each other. I'd like to think as we come back to shul, we'll be a little bit more sensitive. And there's a beautiful story told about the late, great Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the Rosh Yeshiva of Mir, who was very friendly with an American captain of industry who was actually asked, Howard Schultz was asked at one point to stand as president in the last presidential election. And he told them a story from when he went to the Kotel together with Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel. As they approached the Kotel, Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel stopped. And as some of you may know, he had very severe Parkinson's in his later years. And Howard Schultz thought at first he stopped because of the Parkinson's. And he said to Rosh Hashiva, would the Rosh Hashiva like to move forward now? Can we go to the wall? He said, Howard, you go. I've never gone further than this. He said, what do you mean? He stopped 10 meters before the wall. So he said, I've never gone further than this, but you go. You need it, you go. And he concluded and said, I've never gone close to this because I feel I'm not worthy. He said about himself. And Howard Schultz said that when people asked him whether he'd stand for the presidency, he said, I'm not worthy, quoting that particular story. The beauty of that story is when I go to the Kottels and heard that story, I do go right up to the wall. I feel that I need that. But I always stop and say a chapter of Psalms before I actually approach the wall, the last 10 meters or so, just on the back of that particular story. What it means to revere, not to fear, not to in some way be negative about our holy places, but to have a sense of appreciation for them. So, for example, one cannot work in accounts other than those which are mitzvah related. For example, charity collections. We look after them with respect, cleaning and washing down kindling lamps as a sign of honor. Interesting little halacha here, which is not so well known. One should not kiss one's little children within them, as it's inappropriate to display love to anyone within them other than love to Hashem. May his name be blessed. So just an introduction there, a reintroduction to what our shuls are about. Source number 11 tells us even more about the sanctity of Shul. Even after their destruction, they retain their sanctity. And just as we display honor towards them in their prime, so in their desolation. Chutz mikibud v'ributs. We don't sweep them out, we don't clean them, we don't wash them, because actually it's a fascinating teshuvah of Rav Elyashiv when they asked about whether to sort of jet spray the kotel to make it even cleaner and sort of to remove the bits of moss growing between, the leaves growing between, and he said not to do so. He said people should come here with a feeling that this is an ancient relic which is still subject to a certain element of desolation, should encourage us to pray for the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. If we make it look too nice, we might think this is it and we've got everything we need and nothing more, etc. And therefore, if weeds begin to grow in them, one can pluck the weeds, but leave them there, mishum agmas nefesh, to increase that sense of people feeling that we're missing something. We haven't got our shul back yet in the way we wanted. We haven't got our Beis Hamikdash back. And as a result of that, people will be moved to make efforts to rebuild them. The Mishnah Berurah in source number 12 tells us, why is it that shuls retain their sanctity even in their desolation? And a few years back, 7 or 8 years ago, I know Naomi Landy was on the trip. There may have been others as well. We went on a trip to Poland, we did a shul trip to Poland led by Spencer Lewis and myself. And one of the things that was on in Schindler's factory at that time was on display, was a display of photographs of destroyed shuls of Eastern Europe. There are thousands of them. Beautiful, beautiful architectural edifices, each one with the sweat, blood, toil, tears, and love of a Jewish community behind it. And you see them in their desolate state, in their desolation, and you realize what this halacha really means. And the Mishnah Berurah says, why is it that shuls, even after they're no longer being used, even after they're destroyed or desolate, still have a certain sanctity? Because it says, V'hashimoisius mikdashechem. It says, a verse in Vayikra, in the Teichocha of Parshas B'chukosai, I will destroy your holy places. It doesn't say mikdashechem ashimim. Your holy places I will destroy. The suggestion is, I will destroy, but mikdashechem, they'll remain your holy places. The Hebrew syntax is such, if it would have said mikdashechem ashimim, it would have meant your holy places are destroyed. It doesn't say that. It says, I will destroy that which remains your holy places. Lahoris Lano in source number 12 to teach us to kadosh meim, they're holy, even though they may be desolate. In the Madura's Dirshu, the Mishnah Berurah, which is a beautiful edition, which has been produced with copious footnotes and further explanations, there's a question, he brings down the name of the Tashbat as to whether a shul which has been completely taken over by vandals, enter, desecrate it, take possession of it, whether you're allowed to claim back the value of the shul, reparations. I remember Michael Kay, his father-in-law, his family, the Tigners, had a shul in Warsaw, which was called the Tigner Shul. Showed me pictures of the doors and various other things, etc. And there's a fascinating question as to whether one is allowed to claim the proceeds back if the government say, well, you don't want the building now, we don't want the we've got the building for other purposes. Are you allowed to take money in exchange for a shul, be it a private family shul or a public shul? And it seems, according to the Tashbats, you're allowed to do so. Because once it's been requisitioned, once it's been taken over by other forces, it's viewed as something where the sanctity does depart. But as I say in the end of source 12, look in English, but in respect of shuls in the old city of Yerushalayim, between 1948 and 1967, the opinion of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was that the capture may well not remove the sanctity, just the sanctity of Yerushalayim itself, according to Maimonides, is something which is not removed even with conquest, for the original sanctity was such as to sanctify it then and for the future. Yerushalayim never loses its sanctity. Likewise, its shuls, and therefore the shuls of Jerusalem may not be subject to a revoking of their sanctity. Our shul, thank God, may have unfortunately been empty of its congregation for the past 3.5 months, but Baruch Hashem, it's not lost its sanctity. Sifrei Torah are there well and will be rolling them shortly to get them ready for use next week, please God. And what we need to do is to make sure that as part of our return to Shul, we think about these concepts and ensure that in planning our return to Shul and Tefillah B'Tzibur, as well as the vital element Mishum Sakona that I've been stressing throughout this year, we've got to make sure that our hand washing facilities are first class, that we maintain our social distancing, that we're careful about every particular area, and we will also be able to operate a track and trace by knowing exactly who has booked in and who has been present at Shul. God forbid, should there be any person who's been to Shul and found themselves subsequently to be infected, then we'll be able to operate a track and trace for people who have to self-isolate as a result. That's critical. But it's critical as much as we should have all the preparations for safety in place, that we have the preparations in place for valuing, esteeming what Shul is about, understand the value of Seder, as I've explained it today. Now, the final part of the shir, which we've got 9 minutes to be able to share together, is about a fascinating question of the comparison of lifetime against limited holiness. We've shown how shuls represent lifetime holiness, even in a desolate state, so long as they haven't actually been taken over and appropriated or misappropriated for other secular purposes. Until that time, they retain their sanctity. The question is of something which has a lifetime sanctity order attached to it, if you like, and something which has had a temporary sanctity, which has greater priority. And this is source number 13, and we'll trace this through in the latter few sources here. Kohen Gadol v'Noz, it's a fascinating sugya which came up as a result of the Parsha of Nosa we learned a few weeks ago, learned to ourselves, unfortunately, a few weeks ago. Kohen Gadol v'Nozir, the Mishnah tells us in Nozir Mem Zayin, a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, and a Nozir, someone's taken Nazarite vow to abstain from drinking wine or eating grapes, taking a haircut, and from ritual impurity through contact with the dead. Ein matavin the tamili krevehen. They're not allowed to become ritually impure through contact with the dead, even their close relatives. Avo mitamin lemeis mitzvah. But they are allowed to become tomei if there's an unattended corpse where no one knows who's got responsibility as an individual and the individual has to be buried. They're allowed to become tomei for that because that takes the priority. If a kohen, a gadol, we'll see which kohen it was, they would go on the journey and a nozir together, umatzor meis mitzvah. And they find the meis mitzvah. Who has to bury him? Who has to become tomei? The kohen gadol, whose lifetime has a lifetime of sanctity attached to him, or the nozir. So Rabbi Lezer says, you tomei kohen gadol, while you tomei nozir. Rabbi Lezer's opinion is that the kohen gadol should be tomei and not the nozir, and we'll see why in a minute. Chachamim say you tomei nozir, you kohen hedjot. Says the nozir has to become tomei, has to break his special vow, and not even an ordinary kohen, never mind a kohen gadol. Amalem Rabbi Lezer says, Rabbi Lezer, Yitami Kohen She'en maybe Korban al Tumasa, if Al Yitami Nozer may be Korban. He says, better let the Kohen become Tomei, because he doesn't have to bring a special offering for becoming Tomei. He just resumes his status of sanctity after the required period of purification and the purification process. Vali Tomei Nozer, and don't make the Nozer become Tomei, Shu maybe Korban al Tumasa, because he has to bring a special offering. We don't want to invoke the special offering. Omrullah said the sages whose opinion we follow back to him, Yitami Nozer she'en kedushos or kedushas olam. The Nozer has to become Tommy because his kedusha is not over else in kedusha. Yitami Kohen she kedushos or kedushas olam. The Kohen shouldn't become Tommy because his kedusha is a kedusha which is everlasting. Fascinating shayas don't have time to go into now, but when people are signing up for Shul, and if there may be limited amounts of places, the Kohanim have a priority. And if so, how many Kohanim? Does it just have one Kohen for an Alila Kohen? Or can every Kohen say, Kidashta, you've got to give priority and precedence to the Kohanim? At any rate, in source number 14, we see that Tosfos asks a very interesting question. You told me a Nazir is only a Kedusha Shah, is only a temporary Kedusha. There is a possibility of a Nazir declaring himself a Nazir forevermore. Normally, a Nazir, Stam Nazirus, as we'll see Tosfos brings down, is Shloshim, is for 30 days. But if a Nazir, like, for example, Shimshon HaGibor, the mighty Samson, a Nazir is declared to be a Nazir forevermore, so surely he's the same as a Kohen, answers Tosfos a very interesting principle. There is a category of a person who belongs to a Kedushas Olam, an everlasting sanctity. That's a Kohen. And his sanctity cannot be breached, cannot be defiled. Whereas a Nazir, even though he's got to bring a korban, so we don't like to add to the korbanos, and that shows the significance of his breaching the terms of his Nazirite vow. Nevertheless, since Stam Nazirus Shloshim normally Nazirus is a category which lasts for 30 days, it's less significant the Kedusha of a Kohen in this respect, and the Nazir is the one who has to ritually defile himself. In source number 15, we have a Rambam, a Maimonides, who deals with this particular question of the Kohen and the Nazir once again, and he says that the Nazir is the one who has to be Matame himself, has to become ritually impure, even though in so doing he will undo the earlier days of his Nazirite vow. Nevertheless, he has to bring the offering since his sanctity of a temporary nature, even if the vow is unlimited, as Tosfos says, but the Kohen has an everlasting sanctity, Kedushas Olam. The Lechem Mishnah wonders if the Tosfos and the Rambam are going along the same lines when they say that a Nazirite vow is different because it is Stam Nazirus Shloshim Yom, because it's only, as it were, in a category of something which is normatively only for 30 days. The Rambam says something rather different. He says that a Kohen's Kedusha is so special because it's from the day of birth. And Ein Lo Heter, it's something which cannot be, there's no way to remove this sanctity. He can't be released from it. You have this sometimes, a Kohen who wants to marry a divorcee. He can't do that. So I'll renounce my Kohuna. You can't renounce your Kohuna. You're a Kohen by definition. Just like a 12-year-old becomes Bat Mitzvah on a 12th birthday, and a 13-year-old becomes Bar Mitzvah on his 13th Hebrew birthday. Likewise, a Kohen is a Kohen is a Kohen. So the Lechem Mishnah wants to say that the Rambam learns differently the whole concept of the Kedusha of the Kohen as opposed to the Kedusha of the Nazir. And he wants to say that the Nazirite vow is therefore qualitatively different to the situation of the Kohen, because the Kohen is a Kedusha which is from the day of birth and it can never be lifted, whereas the Nazirite vow is different. Now, in sources 16 and 17, we come to an understanding of what the Nazirite vow is all about, and this teaches us about the difference between permanent Kedusha and temporary Kedusha. The Nazirite vow, there's discussion in the Gemara Tanis Yud Aleph in source number 16 about whether a person who engages in extra fasting is considered to be a sinner or whether he's considered to be someone who is holy. And this is based on learning exposition from the case of the Nazir, of the Nazarite. It says in the verse in Bamidbar Vav in Naseh v'chipelov me'asher choton nefesh that the Nazir, at the end of his period of Nazirus, has to bring an offering, and that offering itself is evidence of a chait. What's the chait? What's the sin of a Nazir? Sure, it's a good thing. He says, he's denied himself, he's abstained, he's denied himself the worldly pleasures of wine. So says Shmuel, it's a kal v'chomer in a fortiori argument. If someone who denies themselves one bit of pleasure, the narrow area of wine, is considered to be a chayte, how much more so if you take on extra non-statutory fast days for whatever reason, should you be considered a chayte? Rabbi Loza says, in contradistinction to Rabbi Loza Kappa Rebbe, he says he's a Kodesh, because the verse says about the Nazir, Kodesh ye gadol perasa roshei. He's considered to be holy, allowing the locks of his hair to grow long. And he's considered to be holy, if he's considered to be holy in abstaining from one thing, how much more so if you abstain from everything? You know, they say absence makes the heart grow fonder. We're thinking about that at Shul a moment. You see from this, abstinence also apparently makes the heart grow fonder. The Rambam, in codifying the situation of Nazir, makes clear this distinction. If you're going to ascend to a particular rarefied level of sanctity and restriction, he says, if you make a vow in order to, as it were, straighten out an attitude, improve one's actions, that's there's some praiseworthy. How so? Someone who has succumbed to gluttony and prohibits themselves from eating meat, that's worthy. It's source number 17, it says, but someone who says, I will be a Nazir if I do not do something or similar. In other words, he's flippant with the Nazirite vow. You know, if my team win the league, too late for that one, Liverpool have already done it. But if next season my team win the league, I'll become a Nazir for 30 days. A person says that. Ridiculous. That's considered a Nazirus of the wicked. In other words, I put it in source number 17 in the outline, to the ends justify the means in sincere service of Hashem. If you're serving Hashem and you take on an additional restriction because you need that in order to get, it's a means to the end of where you want to get to, that's appropriate. That's temporary Kedusha. Permanent Kedusha is something which is always there, which always lasts. The class of Judaism, the beauty of Shul is that it is always there for us. We've been able to adjust and to adapt through our tefillah, through our divine service to best possible effect over the course of the first 3.5 months. But we know that even though we've sought the crumbs of comfort in the things that have been nice, extra family time, not so pressured, we've been able to actually think about what we're saying in davening, we've been able to sort of take our time over things, lead more meaningful lives, catch up with things we otherwise would never do, etc., etc., etc. With all of that, we've missed Tefillah B'tzibur. The power of the community coming together. And it's going to be difficult when we come back because we won't be able to sing the familiar tunes, at least initially. It will be an experience where we won't want to rush the actual process of tefillah, but we will need to be in and out as quickly and expeditiously as possible. I hope that what I've done today in the course of this year is not to go over the obvious. The obvious you can work out for ourselves and we can discuss between us, and we will experience as we go through it together. We're thinking it through, working on it. I wanted to give a broader perspective on this whole question of priorities and considerations in life, of how much Seder means to us and what we've missed, even as we've tried to maintain as much of our Seder as we possibly can. On Chamira Sakanta Meisura, of how we've needed to be so careful and need to continue to be so careful in making sure that we shield appropriately from the pandemic, and yet as there is unlockdown, that we follow the guidelines meticulously but are not afraid to re-engage. To understand beyond that the beauty of Shul, as we did in sources 10 through till 13, and in the latter part, which was really a shir in and of itself almost, about the Nazir and the Kohen, exploring temporary sanctity as opposed to eternal sanctity, and making sure that we value and esteem eternal sanctity, but also connect with temporary sanctity in an appropriate way to allow ourselves to build and build yet further Boris Johnson puts it in terms of build, build, build as far as the recovery of the economy. I say build, build, build as far as Torah, mitzvahs, stoka, chesed, bein odom lamokum, bein odom lachaveroi, and we should see the new normal become ever more chadesh yomenu kekedem, the old normal, and the blessings and protection of Hashem extended to us, all Klal Yisrael, and all mankind at this critical time. Amen v'amen.
Amen.
Amen.
Bruchim to you, Bruchim to you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
Shkoyach, Rabbi Ginsbury. Pleasure to you.
Bruchim to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Rabbi Ginsbury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Alan.
Oh, good. First of all, thank you very much, Shkoyach, for today. And secondly, I noticed the email which went out for the Gomorrah share. Is it 9 a.m. tomorrow? If you can confirm that.
Oh no, sorry, it's a mistake. Sorry, it's 8:30 tomorrow night. I want to send the Toshma. It was on the. This is what happens whenever you use previous emails as a background. I'll send out another email. It's 8:30 as usual tomorrow night.
As usual.
Yeah,
right.
usual time tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for drawing that to my attention. I'll make
Thank you,
sure
Rabbi Ginsbury.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. All the best. Have a very good day, and thank you to Rabbi Portnoy for hosting as ever, and to Kenny for his efforts. And remember to think about someone who perhaps can have word with Kenny about taking on the coordination of Tashma going forward into 2021. Please, God. Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good week. All the best. Bye for now.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye.